looking at Stoicism versus Epicureanism, right? These are two different schools of philosophy, right, that many Israelites got into during the centuries prior to Christ, his nativity, right? We have the books of First and Second Maccabees, where we read about how the Israelites, right, the Jews were Hellenized, right? They gave way to pagan Hellenistic customs and philosophies, right? So these are the two schools of philosophies, right? So you have Stoicism. Stoicism was founded by Zeno of Chittim, right? Chittim is Cyprus. Chittim is the Hebrew word, right, for Cyprus, right? Chittim or Kaphium, right? So the Stoic philosophers believe that humans should not pressure desires like power and wealth, because these are dangerous. The ultimate good is seeking knowledge and showing no emotion towards pleasure or pain, right? On the other hand, we have Epicureanism. It was founded by a gentleman by the name of Epicurus, right? The Epicurean philosophers believe that the only real things are those we can experience with the five senses. The ultimate good is seeking pleasure and achieving harmony of body and mind. So you can see that they're at odds, right? The Stoics and the Epicureans, right? Now, we went in last week about the Israelite adoption of Greek customs, right? And we read about this in the books of First and Second Maccabees, right? With that said, right, let's move on. These are some key Hellenic institutions, right? So we have the gymnasium, right, which means naked exercise, right? We read about this in First Maccabees 1, verses 13 through 15, right? And part of the gymnasium is called the Ephebion, right? A young man between the ages of 18 and 20 was known as an ephebos, right? And these ephebion, which were seen as finishing schools, right? These were usually for the upper echelon of society, right? So you have, by the 1st century BCE, these were reserved for young men, right, who are in these upper echelon societies, where they learned and were educated in military, philosophy, and literary studies, right? So again, this ties back into the Acts 10 breakdown with Cornelius, and how Cornelius is emphatically an Israelite, right? The apostles were sent by Yahawashi to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, right? A lot of times people caught up in, the Great Commission, go to all nations, right? Well, the Bible tells us that the children of Israel will be scattered to the four corners of the earth, will be scattered amongst all nations, right? We see prophecy says that we will be gathered out of all nations, right? Tobit chapter 13:3 says, proclaim him amongst the Gentiles, for he has scattered us amongst them, right? We see in John, the 7th chapter, the Jews are asking, where's Christ going to be that we cannot find him? Well, he goes to the dispersed amongst the Gentiles and teach the Gentiles, right? That word for Gentiles is the word Hellene, right? Greek, right? So amongst these different localities, these different cities, whether they were in Palestine and Syria, or if they were in the Hellenic world, right, in Greece, right, in Rome, and all these different places, you had Greek culture and philosophy and ideology that was being absorbed by the Israelites. Okay, this is a fact, right? So this is again, I brought this out last week, right? This is going into the Ephebion, right? Mayash, if you can read this, read the 2nd and 3rd paragraph.
God, the citizens educated his son, the citizens educated his son in the municipal educational institutions, the gymnasium and the Ephebion, which were the very embodiment of the spirit of Hellenism.
The very embodiment of the spirit of Hellenism. Read on.
Here, the young citizens received their Hellenic education, developed their strength and agility by physical exercise, and learned poetry and music.
They learned what?
Such an education was not imposed on us, and learned poetry and music. And if such an education was not imposed on the citizens as an absolute duty, no one deliberately avoided it.
Right? You know the age-old saying, when in Rome, do as, right? I'm going to be doing a lesson, Lord willing, should be coming out sometime next week, I'm not sure if I'm going to do it live or if I'm going to pre-record it. We're going to be diving into the parable of the prodigal son, right? Hamashiach Yahawashi was asked by the disciples, why do you speak to them in parables? And his answer said, was very telling. He said, because it's giving to you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to them it's not given. So that's why Yahawashi spoke in parables. And the parable of the prodigal son is literally talking about this phenomenon, right? Where you have the Jews that remained in Jewry, who remained home with the father, right? Following the customs, right? Then you have the younger son who goes amongst the Gentiles, right? Squanders his inheritance, right? And when he realizes, he comes to, the scriptures say, he comes back home and the father accepts him with open arms. Well, guess what happened? The older son who stayed down was jealous. He was envious, right? This is what it talks about when Paul says, I will provoke them to jealousy, right? So emulation, right? So this is what this is talking about. Yahawashi didn't give that parable for any reason. And this is why I've been saying that the individuals who've been forwarding this nonsense doctrine of simultaneous salvation, that they are false prophets, that they don't know what the hell they're talking about, right? And what we're doing is showing the history, right? We're showing you scholarship, right? Guys, I just want you to see the last page of this presentation real quick, right? This is 182 slides. These are all of the sources that I utilize. And guess what? You can click on all of these links, right? Actually, let me go ahead and save it now. This PDF for this presentation is in the description as we speak, right? So you can follow along right on the screen. And after you watch the presentation, you can go and download all of these PDFs. I took the liberty of finding all these PDFs, right? Uploading them, right? On Google Drive, and here are all the links where you guys can download them yourselves so that you can be equipped to tackle false doctrine, right? We might have to throw that track on again, right? But anyway, right? But you get the point, right? This is what was going on in the Hellenic world, right? You had Jews living amongst the Gentiles and living as the Gentiles. And these are the people who Paul was writing to, right? And part of their education would be poetry and philosophy. So when Paul's talking to the Epicureans and the Stoics, right, he quotes a very specific poet, right? And I'm not going to spoil it for you guys, right? But we're gonna show you who that guy is, and we're going to demonstrate how that individual is a Jew, right? So let's continue, right? So what did the Epicureans believe concerning God, right? So you have this thing called the Epicurean paradox, right? It's basically this big hodgepodge and this philosophical, logical loop where they're asking the question of why does evil exist, right? Can God prevent evil, right? Obviously God can, right? And they come to the conclusion that God is not all powerful, right? If evil exists and all this nonsense, right? And guess what? This philosophy was absorbed by a very specific sect of Israelites that we read about in the New Testament, right? We're going to read about it in a bit, right? So when you guys go through the presentation, you can look at this Epicurean paradox, right? This is Epicurus, right? And this is two of his quotes. Death does not concern us because as long as we exist, death is not here. And once it does come, we no longer exist. Don't fear God. Don't worry about death. What is good is easy to get. And what is terrible is easy to endure, right? So it's kind of, it's if you're have your thinking caps on, it's clear to see who was influenced by this philosophy, right? So we have this source right here. It's called Ecclesiastes. Let me pull up the PDF myself here on my screen. Give me 1 second. Right, it's called Ecclesiastes, a contribution. So okay, I'm just coming down with a cold, family, so forgive me. It's called Ecclesiastes, a contribution to its interpolation, containing an introduction to the book, an exegetical analysis, and a translation with notes by Thomas Tyler, M.A. Right, so this guy has a master's, right? So real quick, we're gonna go to pages 36 and 39. Right? Watch this, right? I'm not sure if I included these screenshots on the presentation. This presentation would have been like 200 plus slides if I would have go ahead and add every screenshot, right? So the author discusses the influence of Epicurean thought on Antigonus of Socco, right? Socco we read about Socco in the Bible, right? It's a city in Israel. Antigonus was a teacher of Zadok, who is the founder of the Sadducees or the Zadokites, and a guy named Boethos, who is a founder of the Boethusians, right? They basically believe the same thing, right? And then he notes Sirach 9 and 4 and talking about this very specific topic, right? It says, he shall serve among great men and appear before princes. He will travel through strange countries, for he hath tried the good and the evil among men, right? So this is what Sirach says. And if you don't know anything about Sirach, right, the book of Sirach was compiled in Alexandria, Egypt, right, for Jews in the diaspora, in the Hellenic world, right? And because when we look at Jews in these different cities, right, you had some that stayed down and kept the commandments, and you have others who completely abandoned so-called Judaism, or, of course, keeping the Torah, right? So now, I'm going to read, actually, let's go back. I'm going to read from page 36, right? Actually, let me go ahead and share my screen, right? Stop screen share screen, window, thing, right? So this is page 36, right? At the bottom, it says, interesting evidence in favor of intercourse on the part of the Jews with Greece about 200 BC or somewhat later is furnished by the letter of the Spartan king to Onias III as given by Josephus in Antiquities. This is 12:410, right? In which it is asserted that both Jews and Spartans were descended from Abraham, right? So the Spartans, right, the Lacedaemonians, this is the tribe of Dan, right? And we're going to dive into the tribe of Dan, right, and what they were doing, right, from their onset, right, when we entered into the land, right? So it goes on to say, of no small importance in retaliation, what's going on? In retaliation of our present subject is the brief statement of the Mishnah concerning Antigonus of Socco. According to Abath 1:3, Antigonus came next in the rabbinical succession after Simon the Just and received from him the Mishnaic tradition. In the passage cited, Antigonus is also particularly distinguished as having taught that men should not serve God like hirelings, impelled by the hope of a reward. If we accept the historical position assigned by the Mishnah to Antigonus, and there appears no sufficient reason for discrediting it, we must regard him as living in the first half of the 3rd century before Christ. He is thus the first Jew of whom we have any knowledge as bearing a Greek name. Very important, Antigonus, right? A very noteworthy circumstance. And the question may suggest itself, has this Greek name of Antigonus any essential connection with his doctrine concerning the hope of reward? Now, as Epicurus was teaching between about 300 BC and 270 BC, right? Again, we're talking about he was during the first half of the 3rd century, right? This is the 3rd century, right? BC. It says, it may seem by no means impossible, taking into account Antigonus's Greek name, that his doctrine contains some dim reflection of the Epicurean denial of man's immortality. Indeed, it may well be looked upon as far from unlikely that, in accordance with Sirach 39 and 4, Antigonus had traveled to Athens or some other of the Greek cities that affected with admiration for Greek philosophy and culture. He adopted a Greek name, and that though, of course, it cannot be by any means supposed that he abandoned Jewish monotheism or the Jewish ritual, yet that his subsequent theological teaching was to some extent influenced and modified by what he heard either from Epicurus or from one of his disciples. Such an hypothesis is confirmed by the account given in Abath of R. Nathan concerning Antigonus and the Boethusians and the Zadokites or Sadducees. According to this account, Antigonus had 2 disciples, Boethus and Zadok, who reiterated his teaching, right? This was done, moreover, by successive generations of disciples, and thence it arose in the course of time that through the teaching of Antigonus, the future state of the resurrection of the dead were called in question, right? What did the Sadducees not agree with that Christ agreed with and that the Pharisees agreed with? The resurrection of the dead. Again, when we look at this gentleman, Epicurus, he said, don't fear God, right? Don't fear death, right? Because if we're here, death isn't here, right? And when death comes, we don't exist anymore. So we don't get regenerated. This is why they don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. See how Greek philosophy influenced every aspect of Israelite life? It affected the Sadducees, who were the priests, right? Who were typically of the upper echelons of society in what people call Palestine today, or the land of Israel, right? And when we look at last week's presentation, who was pushing Hellenism? It was the upper echelons of society. We learned about the Tobiites and their duel with the Oneids, right? We read in the scriptures how the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right, they were angry about Christ and all the authority that he had, because they thought that he was going to dismantle their power, right? But let's continue. It goes on to say, it says, it may well appear that in the doctrine attributed to Antigonus in the Mishnah, we have a noteworthy indication to be observed that the Mishnah in Barakath, just 9 and 5, looks back upon the time when the Epicureans, right? So again, what you're going to find out in this presentation is that we have 1st and 2nd century AD Israelite writings, right, from the Mishnah, the Talmud, right? Of course, we don't adhere to the tenets of the Talmud, but the Talmud and the Mishnah are important for understanding history in certain aspects, right? So we see in the 1st and 2nd century that they're writing about the Epicureans, right? And how Jews were being influenced by the Epicureans. And we're going to read more about that in the presentation. It says, looks back upon a time when Epicureans corrupted the Jewish faith, saying that there is only one world. In consequence of this Epicurean doctrine, the Missionists tell us that, I'm not going to read that, was used in all forms of blessing in the sanctuary where alone had been previously employed, right? It is true that with the Old Testament before us, looks like he's quoting Nehemiah 9 and 5, we cannot very easily admit that such change was consequent of the diffusion of the doctrine of Epicurus as to a future state. But nevertheless, I see no sufficient reason for regarding the word Epicureans in the passage cited as equivalent merely to heretics or atheists, right? It's not only merely talking about heretics, because this word began to be used, as we're going to see, to mean a heretic, because the Epicurean doctrine is heretical, right? Because it teaches that don't fear God, right? We only have one life, right? We don't keep coming back. It teaches against what the Bible teaches, which is regeneration and how there are other worlds, right? Other eons or ages. Let's continue. It says, it certainly appears to me, especially taking into account evidence before adduce, altogether the most probable conclusion that the Mishnah writer speaks of corruption and apostasy consequent on the acceptance of true Epicurean doctrine among the Jews. True Epicurean doctrine among the Jews, even though what he connects therewith may not be admissible. Comparable also the Sanhedrin, which is 9 and 1, Rosh Hashanah, right, 2 and 1. I do not maintain that the Jews did not sometimes designate as Epicureans those who were not disciples of Epicurus, but this usage is probably to be looked upon as secondary and subordinate. The sources of Jewish history do not, with regard to Stoicism, furnish us, so far as I know, with any evidence as to its introduction among the Jews prior to the 200 BC, similar to the evidence which has been adduced with respect to Epicureanism. And why is that? Because Zeno of Chittim, right, he was born after 200 BC, right? But let's continue. It says, but since for reasons which have been already mentioned, Stoicism would seem to have been especially likely to find favor with Jewish minds, we may well conclude that if there were among the Jew disciples of Epicurus, there must also have been disciples of his contemporary Zeno. Stoicism, however, would more easily allow for interfusion, right? We have this thing called syncretism, right? We have a gentleman by the name of Philo. He is a Jew, a Greek Jew, a Hellenized Jew that lived in Alexandria, right? He was a part of a wealthy family. His nephew was the second in charge of the Roman army in the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. Right? We went over this in the last presentation on Cornelius, right? So Stoicism, however, would more easily allow for interfusion and incorporation with Judaism than would the doctrine of Epicurus, right? Again, you had Jews doing this thing called syncretism, where they were mixing philosophy, right? Greek philosophy with the scriptures. And there's a problem with that, right? But even when we look at Stoic values, a lot of the values do kind of line up with what we read in the Bible, right? But we'll get into that. It says probably the adoption of the doctrine of the porch, right? That's where the term Stoicism comes from. The word for porch in Greek is stoa, right? It says did not lead to apostasy or occasion any marked or conspicuous change. And on this account, as appears likely, the sources of Jewish history are silent as to the time of the introduction of Stoicism, right? So again, this presentation, right? This particular source right here, it demonstrates how Epicureanism influenced the Sadducees, right? Now, this is a book called Anti-Epicurean Polemics in the New Testament Writings. The author discusses how Epicurean ideas entered Jewish awareness via Hellenistic border cities such as Decapolis, right? We're going to dive into what Decapolis is, right? Decapolis is an area in the land of Israel, right? There were 10 cities, hence the word deca, which means 10, and polis is the Greek word for city, right? Which is in the land of Israel, and some of those cities are in what's known as Syria today, right? And of course, the coast. Popular philosophical cliches and political elites, right? The author discusses how Sadducean theology resembles Epicureanism, especially denial of resurrection, focus on this worldly life, skepticism towards providence. Well, what is providence? Providence is the divine authority of the Most High God, right? Because he's in control of all things, right? Epicureanism brings that into question. Let's continue. It says the author also discusses how Philo and Josephus, who have Jewish philosophical polemics, right? A polemic is basically a writing against someone, right? So this presentation is a polemic against the doctrine of simultaneous salvation for the heathen, right? As forwarded by the brothers of Genesis, right? This is a polemic against Genesis and their nonsense doctrine, right? So Philo, he's deeply trained in Greek philosophy, right? He rejects Epicureanism sharply, right? And he also talks about how gods who do not care are worse than atheism, right? And he uses Platonic and Stoic tools instead, because again, he's trained in philosophy. You see how Stoicism more so aligns with the biblical teachings than Epicureanism, right? Think about it like this, right? When we read in the Bible, in the book of Acts, we read about how all these Pharisees believe on Christ after Christ's crucifixion. We don't hear about Sadducees believing on Christ in the resurrection of the dead. Why? Because they did not believe in the resurrection, because they were influenced by Epicureanism. This is very important to understand. We have to understand the cultural and the historical and political landscape that was happening before what we read in the so-called New Testament. We go from Malachi, we skip over the Greek captivity, and we jump right into the middle of the Roman captivity. All that history was taken out of the Bible, right? And it's found in what's called the Apocrypha. We read about this in 1st and 2nd Maccabees, right? The author goes on to talk about how Josephus, right? Josephus attacks Epicureans for eliminating providence, undermining moral accountability, right? His polemic aligns with Pharisaic theology and Stoic ethics, showing how Epicureanism became the anti-model of Jewish piety, right? Very important to understand, right? So before we go forward, I'm going to read a couple of pages I'm gonna read a couple pages from this book really quickly. Let me see. Get this up. Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's go to page 71. Right, watch this. Let me share my screen. Right.
That's this book, Anti-Epicureanism.
Yep, this is this book right here, right? So let me just zoom in some so brothers and sisters can see. Right. So it says, finally, what we are interested in most in Josephus' mention of the Sadducees' rejection of the persistence of the soul, right? I.e., regeneration. Its immortality, since the soul perishes along with the body. This view of the Sadducees is known from their disputes with Jesus. However, if in Josephus' testimony, the Greek philosophical terminology and point of view are striking, he makes a distinction between the body and man's soul, right? And then emphasizes the persistence of the soul. The Epicurean overtone of this thought is evident, as will be shown at length in the next chapter. The Sadducees' denial of punishment and reward after death is the logical and theological consequence of rejecting divine providence and the soul's immortality. For the Sadducees, only mortality is important, for nothing is to be expected after death. The features of the Sadducees' theological views show three elements that also characterize the philosophical thought of Epicurus: the rejection of providence, the denial of the soul's immortality, as well as denying judgment and reward after death. Moreover, the convergence with Epicureanism is indicated by the distinct emphasis on man's free will choice. The Bible doesn't teach free will, but the Sadducees, they teach free will, right? Now, the Sadducees were primarily Levites. I remember having a conversation with a brother, right, who's a Levite, who was a former member of my former camp, right? And this brother is leaning towards free will. There's no new thing under the sun, right? You have Pharisees on the earth today. You have Essenes on the earth today. You have Ebionites on the earth today. You have Sadducees, Pharisees. You have everyone of every sect on the earth today within the Hebrew Israelite community, right? Let's continue. It goes on to say, the only thing that his fate depends on, the necessity of man's self-determination, is also characteristic of Epicurus' views. Thus, Josephus' description of the Sadducees makes it possible to associate the religious faction of the Sadducees with the garden. Right, the garden is this Epicurean, like, I'm not sure if it's like a poem or something, but it was like something that they, of course, pushed. This is one of their doctrines. Right, and so the Sadducean views presented by Josephus could be Epicurean. Yet care should be taken not to equate the Sadducees with Epicureanism, since Josephus does not explicitly mention the Sadducees as Epicureans. Additionally, he mentions details that do not allow us to forget about the party's Jewish provenance. He emphasizes its aristocratic and egalitarian nature, and the fact that the small but rich social class, again, we talked about this last presentation about how the upper echelons of society, they were the ones that were pushing Hellenism and Greek thought, right? Hence, you got the Oneids, you got Jason, you got Menelaus, you have all these guys, right? And we had the Tobiates who are pushing Hellenism and Greek culture and customs on the people, right? It goes on to say, associated with the priestly families belong to it. Josephus further points to the Sadducees' love, right, of debates and disputes with teachers of wisdom. And this can be confirmed by the dispute between them and Jesus, Yahawashi. The Sadducees, unlike the Pharisees, rejected the oral tradition that arose around the law, right? Yahawashi spoke against that as well, right? Josephus also mentions the violent, malicious, and harsh disposition of the Sadducees toward each other and outsiders, contradicting the image of the Epicurean living and friendship. Additionally, he indicates that the Sadducees held various offices, right? So these were pages 71 and 72, right? I'm going to jump down to page 74. Lucky. There's something else I want to read here. This is still on page 72. It says, it is not known exactly when the Sadducees and their religious views originated. The party was certainly formed during the period of the Maccabees, the reign of Antiochus IV Epiphanes, or shortly thereafter, because during the reign of John Hyrcanus between 134 and 104 BCE, the Sadducees existed as an organized religious sect. Josephus, this is from Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 13, verses 293, right? It does not seem possible to indicate more precise date. However, the Sadducees probably came from the circles of priests and high priests, as well as from the Hellenic upper class of Judean society. Hellenic, very important, right? It says there were two factors in the formation of a religious party by the Sadducees: theological, religious reasons, and political, social elements. Again, we read about this in the New Testament, right? The Sadducees and the Pharisees were both trying to maintain their position, and this is why they were against Christ, right? Continuing, it says, if the name Sadducees is associated with Zadok, which it is, and this is the most likely origin of their name, they can be related to the Old Testament priestly line of the Zadokites, the history of this priestly dynasty from the Babylonian exile to the death of Onias, right? So that's page 72, right? I'm down to page 74 real quick, right? It's a second factor influencing the formation of this new religious group was the political and social situation, and in particular, the progression of the Hellenization of Palestinian Jews, right? Palestinian Jews means Jews that live in the actual land, right? Which would become known as Palestine, right? It was the Sadducees who enjoyed the opinion of those who favor the Hellenistic Roman culture and collaborated with the ruling elites, first with the Hasmonean dynasty and then with the Roman authorities. Who would those Roman authorities be? The Herodians, right? Let's continue. A great supporter and propagator of Greek culture was Jason, usurper of the office of high priest and brother of Onias III, the high priest from the line of the Zadokites. Jason maintained a lively contacts with King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, and as high priest, he openly favored Greek education, culture, and lifestyle, introducing Greek customs. Jason's disgraceful attitude was not unique for other Jews, including those from priestly families, who did likewise both before and after the temple was cleansed and the sacrifices restored, as we read in 2 Maccabees 4, verses 7 through 22. Some authors believe that the Sadducees came from this group. This belief should include another aspect. The Jews' reluctance to accept Hellenistic culture was not only religious, but also political and national. This was related to King Antiochus IV Epiphanes, whom they recognized as a sinful root, a great persecutor of the Jews. Yet the Syrian king was an Epicurean, who for the philosophy of the garden by Philodemus. Thanks to Philodemus and his disciples, the Antiochian court of the king was also influenced by Epicureanism, as already mentioned. The extent of Epicurean influence on Judaism is unknown, but Epicureanism must have been known in Palestine, and traces of it have remained in some OT books, rabbinic traditions, and the writings of Flavius Josephus. Furthermore, both groups, the Epicureans and the Sadducees, are generally mentioned together, so some scholars assume a significant degree of Hellenization of Palestinian Jews and formulate a thesis about a probable influence of Epicurean ideas on the Sadducees. This would also be a reason for the convergence between the Sadducean and Epicurean views. Man, I wish I had a damn soundboard, man. Daggers, absolute daggers, right? Let's jump down to page 95, right? And we're going to wrap up on this particular source, right? It's going to get, guys, it's going to get even better, right? Don't you wait, right? So here's a page 95 of the book, right? Page 96 on the PDF, because you got the cover, right? It says, commencing in the late 19th century, much attention was paid to the arrow. Actually, am I supposed to be doing this right now? Areopagus, right? Speech in terms of the connections with the Old Testament and the convergence of the theological message with the philosophical ideas of the pagan world. Some of the earlier claims, as a result of radical literary criticism, and comparative historical religious research, have not survived critical scrutiny. Nevertheless, the closeness between the theological message of Paul's speech and the Stoic views is beyond doubt. As Matt Polans argued, the theological themes of his speech clearly refer to the philosophical theodicy of the Stoics. So again, this right here should show you who of those people that Paul was talking to, who was more inclined to hear the gospel and receive it? It's clear, right? Their critique of idolatry and their view about the nature of God, right? Walter L. Tester showed the mediating role of the synagogue and the Hellenistic Judaism in the adoption of Greek philosophical terminology and the concepts by Christianity, an example of which would be the Areopagus speech, opposing the postulated pagan elements above all the Stoic ones. Bertel Gartner proved the biblical and Judaic character of Areopagus's address, right? So very important, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about. Oh, is this on tripping? Can y'all see? Can y'all even see what's going on? Okay, right. So boom, right. Let's move on, right? I pray brothers and sisters are paying attention, right, and brothers are trekking along with us. It's going to become even clearer as we move forward, right? So again, it's clear that Epicurean teachings influence Sadducean doctrine. It's clear. The Hebrew term for Epicureans, Epicureanism, began to be used to describe a heretic Jew. The term Epicureanism, which is the transliteration of Epicureans, began to be used to describe a heretic Jew, right? Let's continue. This is from International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism, right? And on this presentation, right, if you go to this slide, the source at the bottom, if you click on that, this will take you to this website, right? So it says, so it says, only in Judaism did the name of the philosopher Epicurus come to mean heretic, and Epicureanism heresy. All heresy, however, derives from belief, religious or otherwise. Judaism is the only culture in the world in which the name of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, in the 3rd century BCE, has been a part of everyday language since antiquity. Since antiquity, right? In Hebrew and other Jewish national languages and dialects spoken only by Jews, example, Epicureanism, Epicureanism in the Hebrew, and Epicureans in Yiddish, right? The term Epikureos was used in ancient Judaism to designate a Jew who believed that the universe was subject to natural laws. This is a dagger. This right here is a dagger, right? Let's continue. Those who say the world is autonomous, self-moving, rather than the will of a creator or master. These Jews also believe in man's free will, sovereignty over his own life, and freedom from obligation to observe the halakhic precepts, right? Halakhic just means the commandments, right? So let's continue. More daggers, right? So now, key Epicurean poets and philosophers. You have Zeno of Sidon. Where is Sidon? Sidon is right above what was the land of Israel. Actually, that's our promised land, right? And he was born in 150 BCE. He moved to Athens. He died in 70 BCE, right? Which is before Christ. Then you have a guy by the name of Philodemus of Gadara. He was born in Gadara in 110 BCE. Gadara is mentioned in Mark 5 and Luke 8, right? So when Christ healed the man who had that legion, that was in, it says in the Bible, the country of the Gadarenes. So he was in Gadara, right? So there were Jews there. Pay attention. He moved to Athens, learned under Zeno of Sidon. So Philodemus was the student of this guy, Zeno of Sidon, right? He died between 40 or 35 BCE, right? Let's continue. Why is this important? The geography of where these men are from is telling, especially as we understand how Jews were dispersed amongst the Greek world, were Hellenized and educated in the Ephebeion. Again, in the Ephebeion, you will learn military skills, philosophy, and literary studies, right? So you'd be reading all of this poetry, right? So I had this map created right here, right? Actually, let's go ahead. I want to make this a little. Make this bigger so brothers and sisters can see, right? So this is the land of Israel, right? This will be categorized as Syria, right? You got Antioch right here. You got Sidon, Tyre, right? This is Judea, right? And this is an overlay of the tribal allotments, right? So you got Simeon down here. You got Judah, Dan. Dan's right here on the coast. We're going to talk about understand a lot in this presentation, right? And then over here we have the Decapolis, right? So this is in the land of Israel, right? Let's continue. Decapolis means 10 cities, from Deca 10 and Polis city, heavily influenced by Greek culture, right? If you click on this link, it goes to show that these areas were populated by Jews, Arab Nabateans, and Arameans, right? Which means Syrians, right? The 10 cities are Philadelphia, which was Rabath Ammon, which is in the land of Ammon. You have Gadara, right? Gadara is in the land of Manasseh, okay? You have Pella, Dion, Raphana, Scythopolis, which was called Beth-shean. You have Hippos, which was called Susita, Kanatha, which is Kanath in the Bible, and Damascus. Damascus is up here in Syria, right? Again, Paul was going up to Damascus, right, to persecute believers there because you had Jews all over this place, right? Let's continue. This is right here from Antiquities of the Jews, which is book 8, and the chapter highlights history containing the interval of 82 years from the death of Judas Maccabeus to the death of Queen Alexandra, right? This is chapter 15 in verse 4, right? Yash, if you can read that for me, Bible Shah, right? And before we read that, I want to make you guys understand why this is important, right? The gentleman by the name of Philodemus of Gadara was born within this time frame, right? He was, if I'm not mistaken, Judas Maccabeus, he died in 160 BCE. Judas Maccabeus, right? Judas Maccabeus, he died in 60 BCE, right? He died in 60 BCE, right? If you take 160, right, Slakia, not 60, 160, take 160, and if you subtract, because BC counts the opposite direction, right? If you take 160 and you minus 82, you get 78 CE. Philodemus of Gadara was born in the land of Israel, in Gadara, during that time frame, right? Let's see what Josephus says about Gadara at that time. Read that.
All right, this is chapter 15, verse 4. It says, now at this time, the Jews were in possession of the following cities that had belonged to the Syrians and the Idumeans and Phoenicians. At the seaside, Stratos Tower.
So Stratos Tower, we talked about this last week. Stratos Tower will become Caesarea, where Cornelius was from, right? And we went into how at that time they were gathering Jews from the localities into Herod's army. Right? Continue.
Right. Apollonia, Joppa, Jamhis, Ashdod, Gaza, Anthedon, Raphia, and
Rhinopolura.
Yeah, that word. In the middle of the country, near to Idumea, Adorn and Marissa, near the country of Samaria, Mount Carmel and Mount Tabor, Scythopolis, and
Scythopolis and Gadara. So slow down, right? So Gadara was one of these cities, right? Gadara is where Philodemus, a famous Epicurean philosopher, was born during the time between 160 BCE and 78 BCE, within this time frame of this history, right? I'm just going to jump down, right? He goes on to say, right, because its inhabitants would not bear the change to change their religious rites for those peculiar to the Jews. The Jews also possess others of the principal cities of Syria and have been destroyed, right? So Josephus is attesting to the fact that the Jews had control of these areas during the time in which Philodemus was born. Crucial, right? So as it pertains to Philodemus of Gadara, he was born in a Hellenized city in the land of Israel. During the time in which he was born, the Jews had control of Gadara and other cities of Decapolis. It is clear. It's clear that Philodemus was a Hellenized Jew, because in these cities, what was being pushed? Hellenization, and part of the Hellenization was the Phabion, the gymnasium, and so forth. Right now, if Zeno was born in Sidon, that would make him a Canaanite, right? Right. Let's continue. Let's see. This is from a book called Collins Atlas of the Bible. Now, this I provided with screenshots. I don't have a link to this because I actually took these screenshots from the Kindle version of this book. My wife, she's a bookworm, right? She reads a lot of books. She read freaking Twilight and all these other books and whatnot, right? So I was able to get access to this book through her Kindle Unlimited subscription, right? So I don't have a link for this particular source, right? But this book is not expensive at all, right? So it says, when the Levant recovered from the events that caused the collapse of the Bronze Age Empire in the 11th century BC, both Israel and its Phoenician neighbors developed into important regional entities. Israel and Phoenicia inherited much from their Canaanite past, including closely related languages. But while the Israelite kingdom was mainly agricultural, the narrow coastal plain encouraged the Phoenicians to look outwards. The Phoenicians were sailors, traders, and craftsmen, producing and selling luxury goods, especially in bronze, ivory, precious metals, and textiles. We're going to dive into scriptures, right? And we're going to demonstrate how the term Phoenician does not distinctly mean Canaanites, right? Because it's talking about the coast. Who was on the coast? Judah had a coast, right? We read about how Solomon had a navy, right? We read about how Dan, they were mainly in ships, right? Dan was engaged in this commerce as well, right? And shout out to the good brother Eliel from Anointed House of Saints, right? He did a great presentation on the tribe of Dan not too long ago on his channel, right? It goes on to say they exploited their own natural resources such as timber, especially cedar, fish, and the Murdoch's shell, which is highly prized purple dye was extracted. But they also developed markets and acquired raw materials from far off places. Their ships, the biblical ships of Tarshish, sailed as far as the Straits of Gibraltar. That's near Spain, guys, and beyond into the Hellenic. Gold, ivory, and slaves, along with other exotic goods, came from Africa. Metals, especially silver and tin. Why is tin important? Tin is important in the manufacturing of bronze. You cannot make bronze without tin. Bronze is an alloy between copper and tin, right? Let's continue. It goes on to say, came from Spain, and copper from Cyprus. Cyprus is right off the coast of Israel, right? Cyprus's name literally means copper, right? So let's continue. It says foreign products such as fetians and glass were imported and redistributed abroad and were later imitated and produced locally. By the 8th century BC, Phoenician settlements flourished in many places. Traders were active in Spain, particularly in the south and around the Guadalquivir, whatever that is, basin known as Tartessos to the Greeks, and sometimes proposed as the biblical Tarshish, right? Where there were rich metal deposits. In Cyprus, Phoenician influence is discernible from the 11th century BC. Right now, just for context, right? The Israelites, we are a late Bronze Age civilization, right? We get into the land of Israel during the 14th century BCE, right? The Amarna letters, right, talk about how you have all these hot habitos going throughout the land and causing a ruckus, right? So we've been in the land since like the 14th century BC, right? So by the 11th century BC and by the 9th century, the Tyrrhenians had established a large settlement in Kition. The riches that flowed into the Phoenician city-states, of which Sidon and Tyre are the most powerful, made them welcome partners in political commercial alliances. Phoenician deities were often worshipped abroad. The ruler of Damascus set up a stela to the Tyrrhenian god Melqart, the same deity worshipped by Jezebel, the Sidonian wife of King Ahab in Israel. So Ahab worshipped the same deity as well, right? It goes on to say, perhaps the most important legacy of the Phoenicians was the alphabet. which was generally adopted and passed on by the Greeks to the Western world, right? It goes on to say Israel and Phoenicia. Collaboration between the Phoenicians and Israel made economic sense. Israel controlled important international trade routes and could supply agricultural products such as corn, wine, oil, and balsam, right? And it quotes Ezekiel 27 and 17. We'll get into that, right? In return, the Phoenicians provided craftsmen for great skill and fine luxury goods. They were closely involved with Solomon's building programs and a joint venture to Ophir along the Red Sea coast, right? So again, we read about how Hiram of Tyre, the king of Tyre, and King Solomon, they had a navy together on the Red Sea coast, right? It says alliances between established by David and Solomon and renewed by the house of Omri were strengthened by the dynastic marriages of Jezebel and Athaliah into the royal families of Israel and Judah. Inscriptions show that the Phoenicians were widely present in Israel and Judah, not only in Galilee and in the coastal plain, but also inland, even to as far as Kuntalet, Arjud, and the Negev. The Negev is the desert, right, which is south of Jerusalem. Phoenician carved ivory has been found at Samaria, and Phoenician-style metal bowls have been found at Nimrud in Mesopotamia, right? So just going to show how vast and expansive this trade network was, right? So now let's read Ezekiel 27, verse 12. Bring it out.
This is Ezekiel 27, verse 12. Tarshish was thy merchant by reason of the multitude of all kind of riches, silver, iron, tin, and lead.
Come on.
They traded in thy fairs.
Right. So in your markets, right? Verse 17.
Judah and the land of Israel, they were thy merchants. They traded in thy market wheat of Minnith and Peneg and honey and oil and balm.
Right.
Verse 19.
Pay attention, guys.
Dan,
the tribe of Dan, right? Read on.
Also, and Javan.
And Javan, which would be Yawan, right? Where you get the term Ionian, right? So these are Japhites, right? Read on.
Come. Going to and fro, occupied in thy fairs. Bright iron, Cassia, Calamus, were in thy market.
So now, right, this is important, right? So these goods right here are important to understand. Where were they getting this stuff from, right? We have what's called the Bronze Age, right? Then you have something called the Bronze Age collapse, which was due in part by a group, a band of different people groups known as the Sea Peoples collectively, right? Shout out to the brother YAHAWAH. We've been diving into some sources, right? And we've come to the conclusion that you had a bunch of Israelites amongst the Sea Peoples, mainly the tribe of Dan. One of the Sea Peoples, as attested to by the Egyptians, are known as the Danya or the Dinian, depending on which Egyptologist is pronouncing the Netu, right? The Danya. That's the tribe of Dan, right? For the record, right? So after the Bronze Age, you have the Bronze Age collapse, and then you have the Iron Age. Why was there Bronze Age collapse? Because if any whether copper or tin was missing, you cannot create bronze. So now what's the next thing? Iron, right? Now, Acacia is very important, right? So I did some research, right? Iron at that time was present in Italy, the Greek islands, right, such as Serifos, Andros, and Lorient, in the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal, southern Levant, such as Tel El Safi, Hazor, and Megiddo, right? Then you have the Iron Age, which is between 1200 to 550 BC, right? I'm going to go on. It says the Mediterranean has historically been rich in iron, with major ancient and modern mines in Ebla, Italy, and key sources for Etruscan and Romans in the Iberian Pirate Belt, Spain and Portugal, notably the Rio Tinto area, right? Also in places like Thrace, which is between Greece and Turkey, very important to understand, right? Mine protection continues in regions like Ukraine, right? That's not important, right? So let's jump down, right? So acacia, you know what acacia is, guys? Acacia is cinnamon. And at that time, acacia was only found present in China. So there were trade networks that were going as far as China. This is where they're getting acacia from, cinnamon, right? Then we have something called calamus. Calamus is known as sweet flag, right? It was native to what's known as the Irithis River Valley in Kazakhstan. According to Pliny, I believe it's the younger, right? Or either Pliny the younger or the elder, right? Their father and son, right? It grew in Arabia, Syria, and India. So it originally originates from Kazakhstan. Through trade, Dan and the Japhites, they were getting calamus, which is known as sweet flag. They could have, and it's easy, right? From the Mediterranean Sea, you can travel from the Mediterranean Sea up to modern day Kazakhstan, which is near the Black Sea, right? In our last presentation, we show how you had Jews living in far regions like Bithynia and Pontus and Cappadocia near the Black Sea, right? So there had already been a history of Israelites going as far as there. Very important to understand. This is stuff that we just look over, right? Let's continue. It says, it was an ingredient in the anointing oil, right? And mentioned in the Chester Beatty medical papyri of 1300 BC. Additionally, Dan colonized Cyprus, which had copper mines, right? So when we look at Tarshish in a bit, right? Tarshish, they were getting things like silver, iron, and tin as well, right? So this is important to understand what was going on, right? You have the diaspora, the spreading of the seed of Israel from its inception, right? First Kings chapter 9 and verse 26. It says King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezion-Geber, which is beside Aloth on the shore of the Red Sea and the land of Edom. So Edom is south of Judea, right? The Red Sea empties into the Indian Ocean. So they were all over the place, right? It says, and Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of the sea, with the servants of Solomon. And they came to Ophir and fetched from thence gold, 420 talents, and brought it to King Solomon, right? Second Chronicles chapter 9, it says, and all the drinking vessels of King Solomon were of gold, and the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. None were of silver. It was not anything accounted for in the days of Solomon. For the king's ships went to Tarshish with the servants of Hiram. Every 3 years, once came the ships of Tarshish, bringing gold and silver, ivory. So this is coming from Africa, and apes and peacocks, right? This is from all over the place, right? I think at the time, peacocks were in India. So they were all over the place, getting all types of goods, right? More on the ships of Tarshish, right? Second Chronicles chapter 9, verse 35. And after this did Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, join himself unto Ahaziah, king of Israel, who did very wickedly. And he joined himself with him to make ships to go to Tarshish. So they have a plan to go to Tarshish to get all these goods, right? And they made ships in Ezion-Geber, the same place where King Solomon had a navy with Hiram. Then Eleazar, the son of Dovada of Marishah, prophesied against Jehoshaphat, saying, because thou hast joined thyself to Ahaziah, YAHAWAH have broken thy works, and the ships were broken, and they were not able to go to Tarshish. So some people believe that Tarshish is in Spain, right? Let's look at a little geography, right? You got Israel right here, northern kingdom, Judah, right? You have Edom down here. You have the Red Sea down here. Spain is all the way over here. In order to get over there, you would have to go around Africa to get there. But guess what? They were going and getting ivory and apes and all types of stuff. Again, this is just showing that global network of trade that had been going on thousands of years ago, right? Let's continue. We even see prophetically in Isaiah 60, right, in verse 9. Surely the isles shall wait for me. The ships of Tarshish first to bring thy sons from far. So you had Israelites traveling far. The ships of Tarshish are going to bring back our people from far because we were scattered to the four corners of the earth. It didn't start in 70 AD, right? Let's continue. It says, their silver and their gold with them unto the name of Yahweh thy God, into the Holy One of Israel, because he have glorified thee, right? So more on the tribe of Dan. Oh, it's about to start getting really, really good, right? So Dan, right, in Genesis 49, right, this is what our forefather Jacob, a prophet in his own right, prophesied about Dan. Now, there's been a lot of talk lately about the 12 tribes chart and how people are calling it into question, right, because their elders didn't come up with it, right? And with that said, right, a lot of people don't understand what the 12 tribes chart is, right, and what it's not, right? The 12 tribes chart is not saying that every so-called African American is from the tribe of Judah. It's a compass, right? It shows it's a map, right? We understand through history that many people, right, including the indigenous peoples of North America, were reclassified as Black or African American. So not every African American is from the tribe of Judah. Some of you niggas are from Gad. Some of you niggas are from Reuben. Some of you niggas are from Dan. Let's keep it a buck, right? But let's continue, right? Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that bieth the horse heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. What does this mean? Dan is a serpent in the path, in the way, right? A snake, when he's in a path, he leaves what? A trail, right? Pay attention. Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 22. Here's Moses blessing the 12 tribes. Simeon is the only one that's not mentioned, right? Verse 22. And of Dan, he said, Dan is a lion's whelp. He shall leap from Bashan. Now, a lion's whelp is a young adolescent lion. And when a lion is an adolescent, right, he's on demon time. He's trying to take everything. He's going to the next pride. He's going to fight the king there. He's going to kill him. He's going to kill all his babies, and then he's going to take his bitches. That's how lions get down. And Moses is saying that Dan is like that. He's a lion's whelp, and he shall leap from Bashan. Bashan is the region, part of the allotment of the tribe of Manasseh. Very important to pay attention to, right? Let's continue, right? Joshua 19:47. And the coast of the children of Dan went out too little for them. Therefore, the children of Dan went up to fight against Lashem, which is also called Laish in the scriptures. Now, Laish, coincidentally enough, is another word that means lion in Hebrew. So Dan went to a place in Bashan, right, that was called Lashem or Laish, which Laish means lion. Dan, as a lion's whelp, went there and he took it and smote it with the edge of the sword and possessed it and dwelt therein and called Lashem or Laish Dan, after the name of Dan, their father. This is what Dan would do. He's an adder in the path. He's going to leave a trail. And what Dan does is he leaves his name everywhere that he goes. Very important to understand when we look at history, right? Let's continue. Judges chapter 5 verse 17. It says, Gilead abode beyond Jordan. And why did Dan remain in ships? So this is a war. Woo, this is cold, right? This is a war that was going on, right? During the time of Deborah, where you have Cicero, right? And if you know anything about Cicero, right, and the Sea Peoples, right, one of the Sea Peoples are called the Shardana. Shardana, scholars say that Shardana is Sardinia. Sardinia is an island near Italy, right? They're one of the Sea Peoples. One of the other Sea Peoples are called the Pelashet, which are the Philistines. And then you also have the Dania, which are the tribe of Dan, right? And Deborah's talking about, well, why wasn't Dan here to help? Why was Dan remaining in ships at this time? Because Dan was on the move. Dan was a lion's whelp, going and taking shit. That's what Dan was on, right? It says Asher continued on the seashore and abode in his breaches. So Asher didn't go up to help fight them, right? Because Asher also got involved with it too, right? With these peoples, as we're going to continue to learn more about in future lessons and installments, right? Read Judges 18 and verse 1, 2, and then 7.
Khan, this is the book of Judges, chapter 18, verse 1. In those days there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in. For unto that day, all their inheritance had not fallen unto them amongst the tribes of Israel.
Come on.
Verse 2, and the children of Dan sent of their family 5 men from their coast, men of valor, from Zorah and from Ashtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said unto them, go search the land. who, when they came out of Mount Ephraim to the house of Micah, they lodged there.
Right, so they're in Ephraim's land at this point, right? Read on.
Verse 7. Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and saw the people that were therein, how they dwelt careless after the manner of the Zidonians.
So now this Laish, right? People that were living there, they were living like the Zidonians, right? The Canaanites, right? Continue.
Quiet and secure, and there was no magistrate in the land that might put them to shame in anything. And they were far from the Zidonians and had no business with any men.
Right, let's move on. Right, jump down to verse 11. We'll read 11 through 14.
Verse 11, and there went from thence of the family of the Danites, out of Zorah and out of Ashtaol, 600 men appointed with weapons of war.
So now Dan's about to take some stuff, right? Read on.
And they went up and pitched in
Kirjath Jearim.
Say it again.
Kirjath Jearim.
In Judah.
In Judah, the land of Judah. Read on.
Wherefore they called that place
Mahanadan. So now they have their name in that city as well. So they're in Judah's land, right? And they're naming a city after their father. Again, Dan is an adder by the way. He's going to leave a trail. He's going to leave his name everywhere, right? Again, I said earlier, right, how the Spartans or the Lacedaemonians that we read about in the book of Maccabees, that's the tribe of Dan. Lacedaemon is Lacedaemon. Those are Danites, right? Even this is after the Assyrian captivity. You still had Dan in that land and in that area, right? Continue.
Verse 14.
Finish out 12.
Oh, yeah, verse 12. Right, that place, Mahanadan, unto this day. Behold, it is behind
Kirjath Jearim.
Yeah. Kirjath Jearim. Say it again.
Kirjath Jearim.
So that's Jearim.
Yeah.
Kirjath Jearim. Salakia, y'all. Right, verse 13. And then passed thence unto Mount Ephraim, and came unto the house of Micah. Verse 14. Then answered the 5 men that went to spy out the country in Laish, and said unto their brethren, do ye know that there is in this house of an ephod, and a teraphim, and a graven image, and a molten image? Now therefore consider what ye have to do.
So now, right, this is the situation where they take this Ephraimites idols, right, and then take his priests, because Israel was into heavy idolatry at this time. There was no king in Israel. Niggas were doing whatever the hell they wanted to do, right? They were not worshiping Yahawah. That's why we had this continuous cycle of us going to captivity after captivity after captivity during the time of the judges, right? Verse 27, jump down, and we'll read 27 to 31.
And they took the things which Micah had made,
the idols,
and the priests which he had made, and came unto Laish, unto a people that were at quiet and secure. And they smote them with the edge of the sword, and burnt the city with fire.
Read on.
And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Zidon. And they had no business with any man. And it was in the valley that lieth by Bethrahab. And they built a city and dwelt therein. And they called the name of that city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father. Who was
so this is the same thing that we read about in Joshua, right? This is Laish or Lashem, right? The same situation, right? They named it Dan because they were adder in the way, right? Read on.
Howbeit, the name of the city was Laish at the first.
So Laish is in Bashan, right? Which is in Manasseh's territory. Moses said that Dan is a lion's whelp, and he shall leap from Bashan. From here, he's out, right? Continue.
Verse
Verse 30.
Verse 30. And the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses, he and his sons were priests up to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land.
Come on.
And they set up Micah's graven image, which he made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh.
So this is again during the time when we get to Eli and Samuel. That's when the tabernacle is in Shiloh, right? So Dan was on idolatry from Rip, and they were going amongst the heathen. And what were they going to do amongst the heathen? Be like the heathen. Important to understand what's going on during the time in which the apostles are going around the Greco-Roman world, because you got Israelites, whether they're Northern Kingdom or Southern Kingdom, all around at that time. All right. Boom. Right. So again, so here we have a map. Right. You got Dan allotment right here. He goes to Laish, which is up in the area of Basham, which is Manasseh's territory, which is not too far from Sidon, not too far from Tyre. And from here, they are going to leap. Important to understand, right? This is from Josephus, Antiquity of the Jews, Book 5, Chapter 3 and 1, right? Let me just pull this up real quick. Chapter 3. Let me pull this up. Fuck it, I'm going to read it, right? So it says, now it happened that the tribe of Dan suffered in like manner with the tribe of Benjamin, and it came to do so on the occasion following, when the Israelites had already left off the exercise of their arms for war, and were intent upon their husbandry, and the Canaanites despised them and brought together an army, not because that they expected to suffer by them, but because they had a mind to have a sure prospect of treating the Hebrews ill when they pleased, and might thereby for the time to come dwell in their own cities the more securely. They prepared therefore their chariots and gathered their soldiery together. Their cities also combined together and drew over to them Ashkelon and Ekron. Ashkelon and Ekron was ruled by the Philistines, right? Let's continue. It says, which were within the tribe of Judah, and many more of those that lay in the plain, as they also forced the Danites to fly into the mountainous country, important to understand, and left them not the least portion of the plain country, and set their foot on. Since then, these Danites were not able to fight them, and had not land enough to sustain them. They sent 5 of their men into the midland country to seek for a land which they might remove their habitation. So these men went as far as the neighborhood of Mount Libanus. Family, Mount Libanus is Mount Lebanon, which is north of Sidon. And it says in the fountains of the lesser Jordan, at the great plain of Sidon. So they're up near Sidon the whole time, right? And a day's journey from the city. And when they had taken a view of the land and found it to be good and exceeding fruitful, they acquainted their tribe with it. Whereupon they made expedition with the army and built the city of Dan, of the same name with the tribe of the son of Jacob, and of the same name of their own tribe, right? So this is Josephus attesting to this as well, right? Now, when we look at Deuteronomy chapter 33 and verse 22, where Moses is blessing Dan, it says that Bland is a lion's whelp and he shall leap from Bashan. This word for leap in the Hebrew is the word zanak, right? It means to shoot an arrow, especially to a great distance. This is what it means that Dan would leap from Bashan, right? Again, Dan was right here. He made his way into Judah, camped there, named the town after his own family, went up to the land of Ephraim, all right, went up into Manasseh, took Laish in the land of Bashan, in Manasseh's land. From there, they're going up to Mount Lebanon, which is even further north, right? And from Laish, they would leap, right? Go far distances. Very important to understand, right? So we have just established that Dan was engaged in maritime trade with the Canaanites and will go to far distances per prophecy. We will show their migration historically as well, right? This is for the purpose of demonstrating that Dan, along with Judah and other tribes, established colonies all throughout the Mediterranean and beyond, because they were getting what? Goods for trading, right? In the Bronze Age, you need copper and you need tin. Right, there was just about a year or so ago, there was they found a bunch of shipwrecks off the shores of Israel, right? And they found also a bunch of ingots, right? Ingots are like a clump of metal, right? And a blacksmith's facility or whatever. And they determined that the tin there was sourced from Great Britain. And I have a source that we're going to go into talking about how the Phoenicians, right, how they were going up to Great Britain to get tin, right? Let's continue, right? So we will demonstrate how the term Phoenician was used as a generic term by Greeks to describe Levantine people, right? Which means people from the Levant, which would include Israelites and Canaanites, right? King Hiram of Tyre, was he a Canaanite? Put a 1 in the chat if you think King Hiram of Tyre was a Canaanite. I always thought that he was a Canaanite too. But let's see. 1 Kings 7-14. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali. So people read this to say that, oh, his mom was of the tribe of Naphtali. No. We're going to demonstrate how he's from the tribe of Naphtali. And we're going to show how his mom's not from the tribe of Naphtali, right? It says he was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre, a worker in brass, and he was filled with wisdom and understanding and cunning to work all works in brass. And he came to King Solomon and wrought all his work, right? 2 Chronicles 2:14, the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan. So Dan was all the way up there, right? His mom's a Danite. And his father was a man of Tyre, skillful to work in gold. So is there a contradiction here? No, let's continue. And in silver and in brass and in iron and in stone and in timber and purple and blue and fine linen and in crimson, also to grave any manner of graving, and to find out every device which shall be put to him with thy cunning men and with cunning men of my lord David thy father, right? So now this is Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews, book 8, chapter 3, verse 4. It says, now Solomon sent for an artificer out of Tyre, whose name was Hiram. He was by birth of the tribe of Naphtali. On the mother's side, she was of that tribe, but his father was of the stock of the Israelites. So it's saying that Hiram, his father's an Israelite. If your father's an Israelite, you're an Israelite, right? So this is a book called Who Were the Phoenicians by Nassim R. Ganor, right? It says in 1 Kings 7:13-14, we read, and the king Solomon sent and fetched Hiram out of Tyre. He was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father was a man of Tyre. It is also told that Hiram constructed the temple. The same story with slight variations is found in the book of Chronicles, where Hiram, king of Tyre, sends an experienced man to King Solomon to build the temple. And now I have sent a cunning man endued with understanding of Huran, my father's, the son of a woman of the daughter of Dan, and his father was a man of Tyre. The name of this man is mentioned only in chapter 4, verse 11, and Huram, which is Hiram, made the pots and the shovels and the basins, and Hiram finished the work he was to make for King Solomon for the house of God, to have the same narrative with slight variations, with the same name, Hiram, Huram, in both verses, referring to the same construction, the temple, right? So this guy is saying that there's two different Hirams here, right? That's what he's saying. But Josephus is telling us that Hiram was an Israelite, right? Let's continue. It goes on to say, but on the point, they seem to contradict each other. The book of Kings speaks of Hiram as a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali, and his father a man of Tyre, whereas the book of Chronicles speaks of him as the son of a woman of the daughters of Dan, and his father as a man of Tyre. From both these verses, scholars assume as if Hiram was an Israelite only on his mother's side, while his father was a Canaanitian, and that the names Dan and Naphtali, right, this is page 153, right, or in page 154, an error was introduced by a copyist. It was also concluded that the Israelite temple was copied from Phoenician temple construction. As a matter of fact, there is no contradiction between these two verses. In the Hebrew text, the one verse reads, Ben Isha min benot Dan, which equals son of a woman of the daughter of Dan. The Dan refers to the word Isha, which is woman, i.e. Hiram's mother, is from the tribe of Dan, also translated into English. In the second verse, the Hebrew reads, Ben Isha Almanah Ho Mimat Naphtali. Translated, he was a widow's son of the tribe of Naphtali. But the name Naphtali in the Hebrew text refers to the word Ho, which means he, i.e. Hiram himself is from the tribe of Naphtali and not the widow. In other words, Hiram is from the tribe of Naphtali, while his mother is from the tribe of Dan. It must be remembered that tribal affiliation was by the house of the father. Hence, Hiram was from the tribe of Naphtali by the house of his father, whereas his mother was from the tribe of Dan. When the text adds, and his father was a man of Tyre, this is to inform the reader that although his father was of the tribe of Naphtali, he resided where? In Tyre. Why was it necessary to make this remark? Because it was the tribe of Asher which had conquered Tyre and settled there, and not the tribe of Naphtali. So you got Asher, Naphtali, and Dan all there in Tyre, as well as Zidon, right? Let's continue. It says Hiram was then an Israelite both on his father's and on his mother's side. Josephus writes about Hiram, who was a Naphthalite descent on his mother's side, for she was of that tribe, and whose father was Urias, an Israelite by race. This means he regards him as an Israelite on both sides, except that he substitutes the tribe of Dan with the tribe of Naphtali on the mother's side. To sum up, names such as Zidonian or Tyrian do not indicate that the intention is non-Israelites. I'm going to read it again. To sum up, names such as Sidonian or Tyrrhenian do not indicate that the intention is non-Israelites, right? I'm an Israelite from the tribe of Judah. I'm from Brooklyn. When I lived there, I would be considered a Brooklynite because I resided in Brooklyn, right? Ariella the Brooklynite does not mean that I'm an Edomite or a Moabite or an Ammonite or any other other than Israelite, right? I moved to Philadelphia. I'm now considered a Philadelphian. I say that reluctantly. Right? But again, this is the example. Just because you see the term Zidonian, Tyrrhenian, and by extension, Phoenician, it does not mean non-Israelite. Let's continue. They are by no means synonymous with Canaanites, as most scholars seem to believe. The Hiram that built the temple was an Israelite, and his name is identical with the Hiram, king of Tyre. Why should we see this foreign name, right? So let's continue, right? So the terms Tyrrhenian, Zidonian, and by extension Phoenician are not limited to Canaanites. This is evident with Hiram of Tyre, who is attested by Josephus and other scholars as being an Israelite despite living and ruling in Tyre, which is a Phoenician sister city of Sidon, right? Let's read 2 Samuel chapter 24 and verse 1. We're going to read about David numbering Israel, right? I'm showing you history with the Bible, right? The other guys, they're not showing you this history. They don't know this history, right? The niggas who are saying that, oh, Act 17 kills one West Hebrew Israelites, blah, 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 blah. These niggas can't name you one Epicurean philosopher. They can't name you one Stoic philosopher. They can't tell you what they taught. They can't tell you none of that stuff. They just want to save the white man, right? But let's read.
This is 2 Samuel 24 and verse 1. And again, the anger of Yahawaah was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them to say, go number Israel and Judah. Verse 4. Notwithstanding, the king's word prevailed against Joab and against the captains of the host.
So his man telling him, bro, you can't do that. Nigga, that's for the Levites. What are you doing? But God did it for a purpose because he was mad at Israel. Read on.
And Joab and the captains of the host went out from the presence of the king to number the people of Israel.
Right.
And they passed over Jordan and pitched in Aurora on the right side of the city that lieth in the midst of the river of Gad, and toward Jazer. Verse 6. Then they came to Gilead and Gilead, and to the land of Help me out.
Tatim Hoshai.
Yeah, I ain't gonna try. And they came to Dan Ja'an and about to Zidon.
So Dan Ja'an, there's Dan's name again, right? And about to Zidon. So they're going to number Israel. And why?
Yeah.
Why? Let's continue.
Verse 7. And came to the stronghold of Tyre.
Tyre. Why are they going to Tyre if Tyre is this Canaanite? Because there's Israelites there during the time of David. Let's continue.
And to all the cities of the Hivites and of the Canaanites, and they went out to South Salakia, and they went out to the south of Judah, even to Beersheba. So when they had gone through all the land, they came to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days.
Come on.
And Joab gave up the sum of the number of the people unto the king. And there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men that drew the sword. And the men of Judah were 500,000 men.
So they numbered Israel, right? The Most High God moved David to do this because he was mad at Israel. Well, why was he mad at Israel? Because niggas were worshiping other gods, living amongst the Canaanites. They didn't kill the Canaanites as God told them to, but they were living as the Canaanites, with the Canaanites, and worshiping their gods. That's why we see what happens. David's given a choice. Either famine for a certain amount of time, or death angels going to wipe a bunch of niggas out, and that's what continued to happen. But we're showing this that because so as far back as the time of David, you had Israelites or Jews living in Tyre and Zidon, i.e. Phoenicia or Phoenicia. And if you live there, you would be considered what? A Phoenician. If you live in Tyre, you're a Tyrrhenian. If you live in Zidon, you're a Zidonian, right? And Tyre is a city, is an island city, right? So let's continue, right? So this is from a source from the Levantine Review, Volume 4, Number 2, from winter of 2015.
If I may interject, just think on a practical level. We're still like this, you know. You got brothers that just claim hood. They you know, I got my town tatted on me from being a knucklehead in the streets. Like, it wasn't far-fetched for Israelites themselves to just attach themselves and their identity to a place where they resided at.
Right? And we see all throughout the scriptures, people are called the place where they're from, right? I forgot which prophet is called the Morishite, right? You got Elijah, he's called I forgot what Elijah's called, but that's the place in which he lived, right? So you got the Jezreelite, right? You got the like those are places, right? So very important to understand, right? So this is from the Levantine Review, right? You can click on this link at the bottom to go to this website, right? So it says, let us review the stations of on our journey, whose travel log is to diffuse, whose evidence is fragmentary, but an intuitive sensibility has carried us along to the mysterious paths of potential discovery. It began in ancient times with Israel and Lebanon, neighboring Lebanese Phoenician and Israelite Hebrew peoples, Israelite/Hebrew peoples, with their shared community of relations and language. The tribe of Asher even lived in Cyprus. So here's a source saying that Asher was living in Cyprus, which is right off the coast of where? Of Dan, Judah, and Asher, right? It says, with its Phoenician presence. So Asher is being called Phoenician. The population census in the time of King David, including Tyre and Zidon to the north. Even after the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BC, Hebrews from Zebulun and Asher remained in the northern Galilee/southern Lebanon terrain, right? We read about in the New Testament, you got Anna of the tribe of Asher. You had Northern Kingdom still there, right? Let's continue. Our voyage continued across the Mediterranean Sea and to the north with the Semitic origin Carthaginian people in contact with Jews and the possibility of their conversion to Judaism after the fall of Carthage. The Talmud records the phrase from Zor, which is Tyre, to Cartagena, probably the city of the Spanish coast and not the Carthage of North Africa. That reflects the Tyrrhenian mother city's excursions that Jews were aware of, and I would say are also a part of, right? Let's continue. The mingling of the two peoples acquired further substantiation from the report that King Solomon was attracted to Astarte, right? Goddess of Sidon, which we read about in the book of Kings, chapter 11. Furthermore, 9th century BC, King Ahaz of Samaria, the northern kingdom of Israel, wedded Jezebel, daughter of Ithbaal, the king of Zidon, and worshipped the god of Baal. Thereafter, Athaliah, Jezebel's daughter, married Joram, of the king of Judea. Lebanese religious cults entangled the Israelite kings, and the prophets of Israel berated the Phoenician pantheon that celebrated Tyrrhenian and Zidonian gods. The fall of Lebanese commercial port cities at the hands of Assyria and Babylon was not a mournful development in the eyes of Isaiah and Ezekiel. The possible consequence of military operations and population movements northward and southward between Israel and Lebanon means that Lebanese are really Israelites, or at least that the two people intermixed. This intimates that the Phoenicians were Jews, perhaps pseudo-Jews, that is to say descendants from the tribes of Israel. Freud suggests that when Herodotus mentioned the Phoenicians, he most probably meant the Jews. Right, we're going to go into some accounts from Herodotus as well. Right, noteworthy was King Hiram of Tyre, who loved King David, providing workers and wood to his son King Solomon for building of the temple in Jerusalem. Right? Is it what now?
Sorry, I'll be right back. I'll take.
As a result, the Jewish temple of Jerusalem, Bayath HaMikdash, is called Bayath Yasharahla, right? House of the Lebanese forest, and Lebanon itself referred to as the forest of the land of Israel, right? The father of Hiram was from the tribe of Naphtali, and his mother from the tribe of Dan. They lived in Tyre. Radak, the acronym for Rabbi David Kimhi, the foremost medieval biblical commentator, relates that while King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the Galilee, the Tyrrhenian king reciprocated by allocating to Solomon 20 cities in Lebanon to settle Israelites for the purpose of strengthening the alliance between the two monarchs and peoples. Thus, Israelites would be living in Lebanon, and Hiram sent sailors to work on behalf of Solomon. Another way of connecting the two peoples is to attribute to both a Canaanite identity. The familiar links between ancient Israel with Edom, Ammon, and Moab, along with the bearers of Israelite children by women from Haran, open up vistas of human blending of primeval Eastern history. King David later established an empire reaching into Damascus, which is in Syria, and Solomon extended that dominion eastward to Tadmor, which is Palmyra, in the Syrian desert, right? Important. So again, we have these key Epicurean poets and philosophers. You have Zeno of Sidon, you have Philodemus of Gadara, right? So in conclusion, one could argue that Zeno of Sidon was indeed an Israelite. Regardless, we know that Epicurean thought influenced the Jews, as did other schools of philosophy. Let's see what the scholars say, right? So this is the book, right? And I shared this on my story. And when I posted it, I said, rest in peace, death. This right here, death, dagger, bomb, right? So this is from page 158. I have the physical book in my hand, right? It says, in the earliest rabbinic literature, a peculiar Mishnah provides evidence that the belief in resurrection distinguished groups from underscored legitimacy. Page 159, continuing, it says, all Israel shall share in the world to come, as it is said, thy people shall all be righteous. They shall inherit the land forever, the branch of the planting, of my planting, the work of my hands, that I might be glorified. Isaiah 16:21. And these are the ones who have no portion in the world to come. He who says there is no resurrection of the dead, to be derived from the Torah. The Torah does not come from heaven, right? And it says, and an Epicurean. R. Akiva says, also, he who reads heretical books and he who whispers over a wound and says, I will put none of the diseases on you that I will put on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. Abba Saul says also, he who pronounces the divine name as it is spelled out, right? So again, you have Mishnaic writings, right, from 1st and 2nd century Jews talking about how Epicureans are not going to have part in the world to come. And who's going to rule the world to come? The Israelites, right? Hence Isaiah 60, right? Us being a light to the nations. They're saying that those who deny the resurrection, which would be Sadducees, right? They're not going to have a part in that, right? Let's continue. Page 161. It says, the Epicureans, while never achieving the respectability of the Stoics, achieved considerable popularity, right? I'm not going to continue reading this, but this right here just shows that Stoicism, again, lined up more so with biblical teachings than Epicureanism, right? Page 162, right? It says, in the Tosfeta, a denial of the resurrection and denial of Torah are listed with Epicureanism as transgressions that earn permanent punishment. 3 types of recompense await: eternal life, eternal punishment, and temporary punishment. I have condensed the text to include the relevant material. The House of Shammai says there are 3 groups, one for eternal life and one for shame and everlasting contempt. And they quote Daniel 12:2. There are those who are completely evil. An intermediate group go down to Gehenna and scream and come up again and are healed. But heretics, apostates, traitors, Epicureans, those who deny the Torah, those who separate from the way of the community. Why would this writer be saying that Epicureans are separated from the way of the community? Who is the community? The Israelites, the Jews. Epicureans separated from the community. This is letting us know that these Epicureans are what? Are Jews. Let's continue. Those who deny the resurrection of the dead, and whoever both sinned and caused the public to sin, for example, Jeroboam and Ahab, and those who sent their arrows against the land of the living and stretched out their hand against the and here's where gets put in the dirt. Page 163, right? Lawfully a habitation, Gehenna, is locked behind them, and they are judged therein for all generations. As in the Mishnah and the Sanhedrin, those who deny the providential God and deny resurrection of the dead undercut the authority of the rabbis and are placed beyond divine mercy. A second factor may have made Epicureans threatening to the earliest rabbis, namely their congeniality to rabbinic ideals. Like the rabbis, Epicureans. All right, let me just read it from the actual book. Right, I'm tripping. Hard for me to see. Right, you guys can see it right there on the screen, highlighted in green. Watch this. It goes on to say, like the rabbis, Epicureans promoted the ideal of the philosopher / sage, the moderate, disciplined life, the joy of study, the cultivation of community of learners, and the cult of friendship, and the unity of body and soul. In a general way, the rabbis may have experienced competition with the Epicureans, a group who outwardly shared some of their ethics and way of life, but who dangerously denied the root of the rabbinic system, a just God who attends to human beings. Right? Epicureans believe that the gods don't care nothing about humanity and just let humanity do whatever the hell they want to do and allow evil to happen. Hence the Epicurean paradox. Hence why Epicurus says, don't fear God, don't fear death, blah, 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 right? And we've already demonstrated how Epicurean thought infiltrated Antigonus of Socco, a Jew, and that was taught to who? Zadok and Beothus, who are the people who gave way to the sects known as the Sadducees and the Beathusians, right? Let's continue. It goes on to say, these Epicureans are Jews. The first 2 groups in the Mishnah, the Torah deniers and the resurrection deniers, would not be much interested if they were not Jews. Furthermore, the list of people condemned in the Tosfeta is of people who were part of the Jewish community, but whose relationship is to it is now fractured. Heretics, apostates, traitors, Epicureans, those who deny the Torah, those who separate from the ways of the community, those who deny the resurrection of the dead, and whoever both sinned and caused public to sin, for example, Jeroboam and Ahab. These last two are viewed by the Deuteronomists as Israelites who compromise the worship of Yahawaah. These Epicureans then are likely Jews attracted to and perhaps professing a form of Epicureanism. Let's drop a man. I wish I had a downboard. That's a bomb.
Put them bombs in the chat, man.
Right, let me get bombs in the chat. Bombs in the chat. All praise to the Most High. These niggas are